All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my good buddy Lee Camp. Lee is a comedian and satirist whose work has been seen on Comedy Central, Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, CNN, PBS, MTV. He is the creator of the Moment of Clarity video series and podcast, and the book Moment of Clarity, all of which and more you can find at leecamp.net. Lee, thanks so much for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me back, Matt.
All right, so Lee, let's get to the most important thing first. The most important thing is that in just a couple of weeks, you and I are going to be performing together right here in Boston, Massachusetts at Great Scott in Allston. It's March 22nd, 7:30 p.m. Is this your first time performing in Boston?
No, I've done things in Boston, but this would definitely be my first kind of doing my own hour show. So essentially, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, New York is not that far from Boston. Why have you not made it up to Boston before, Lee? Tell me that. That's what all the people want to know.
The people are demanding. No, I was getting comments about not having been in Boston, and my favorite one was because basically what I've been doing is I go where fans drag me. So
Right.
so if someone says, "Hey, I have a theater and I want to do your show here in St. Louis, let's do it," I'll then work out how we can do it. And basically that's how I've been doing my tours and stuff. So I announced on my Facebook, "Hey, this is a few weeks ago. I'm headed to Baltimore or something." And someone wrote, "All right, Lee, enough screwing around. When are you coming to Boston?" enough of this playtime. Let's make it real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
But so there's no good reason except that no solid fan had come to me and said let's make this happen. So you were the guy that made it happen.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm excited about it because it's like there really is like. It's weird, man, because, like, okay, so obviously New York has a big stand-up scene. California has a different type of stand-up scene. But, like, I moved here about a year and a half ago from Chicago, and Chicago had a very different comedy scene than Boston. And it's weird. There's really not a ton of political comedy here at all. But there actually is, like, an audience for it, is what I found when we've done a Laughing Liberally show here, when Jamie Kilstein's come through and stuff like that. And so there actually are people here that, like, are really happy when people actually do political comedy, and it's tons of college kids. It has a racist past, Boston, but there's a lot of progressives here. So I think a lot of people I've talked to are really excited for the night.
Yeah, and I experienced that in every city. I just did a little tour of it was like Kansas City, Missouri, and Des Moines, and I'm headed to Baltimore, and it's like these cities that you don't think. It's like there are people that want to hear this everywhere. They're not at regular comedy clubs. They're not given the choice. They're not, because most comedians out there don't want to risk alienating a small percentage of the audience to do something that is really important and needs to be talked about. So you end up with not everybody, but a large percentage of comedians talking about the things that it's like everybody can relate to. Mm-hmm. It's like, why not alienate 10% of the audience and do something that is actually important?
Absolutely, yeah. And actually, we didn't talk about this prior to going on the air, but actually I wanted to ask you something because I was wondering what your take on it was. So there was the whole big brouhaha at the Oscars about Seth MacFarlane's the I Saw Your Boobs number, where essentially, he was singing about a lot of the movies where the character that he was bragging about and being a misogynist about had been raped, and they were depicting a rape, and he was like using that. I saw the number. I didn't actually watch the Oscars, but like, I wanted to kind of, what is your take? Are you familiar with that at all, or do you have any opinion on what went down?
Yeah, I mean, I only saw the first 10 minutes of the Oscars, but that was the song in the first 10 minutes. But no, I mean, my point on it is this, and it's that, what do you think they wanted to happen? What do you think the Oscars wanted to happen? Look, we're still talking about this weeks later, and they picked a guy who is not very well known, who's not a movie star. I mean, compared to past hosts, he is well known, but compared to past hosts, he's not a movie star. He's a guy who, wrote and voiced movies like Ted, where you have a stuffed animal banging the stock clerk. Like this, what did they think? They knew this was going to happen, and Ricky Gervais is quote unquote so offensive at the things he hosts, and then they bring him back for the next year. Like,
Right.
this is clearly what they want because people keep talking about it. You could have a funny host that doesn't offend anyone and is maybe less funny but not offensive, and no one talks about it the following day. So I think the idea that, oh my God, everyone's shocked, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I mean, I think that definitely this was planned, and it's not like the show gets written in a vacuum either. It's like the stuff gets cleared what they're actually going to say. So to just say it was just him, I also think that's sort of a load that's pretty hard to swallow. But I mean, a lot of what was coming out of that was kind of a bigger issue. It was that, and even more so the tweet about the Onion where they called the young kid from Beast of the Southern Wild the C word, which they ultimately apologized for that because they thought, you know what, maybe calling an 8-year-old that word, even if the joke was to to point out just kind of the vapidness of Hollywood, was kind of crossing the line. But like a lot of comics have a very mixed reaction to that. Some of them are like, no, they shouldn't have apologized. Some people think they should. What's your take on that?
I don't think they should apologize because it's their, they have a long history of saying things that some people aren't ready for and are offended by. And I'm not, my only thing about that tweet, which, you can be offended by it or not be offended by it, but the whole point of the tweet is that she's not that word. Like, that's what they're saying if you understand satire at all. And so anybody who thinks they're saying she is that word, then they're out of their minds. So I'm not going to say it's the best joke in the world. And furthermore, I find it always takes 146 characters to make the C word funny. So,
right.
But I mean, they've had things that have offended people more in the past than that. It's just that because that one was so immediate, it was on Twitter and people were immediately upset. Like, whereas the newspapers, it's weeks later. And I mean, they came out with one of their newspapers, a week after 9/11? They were like the first comedy after 9/11. I mean, That's a touchy ground to walk.
Right. I mean, I guess it's kind of the bigger picture is, do you think comedians should we be held to any standards at all is kind of the big question, because I kind of think, I actually didn't mind the fact that the Onion apologized, because it's like I know what they were going for with the tweet, but in some ways it's like, this is a little kid, it's an 8-year-old kid, and I know that the joke, I think it was a blown joke. That is kind of my opinion. It was, I don't think their intention was bad, but I think ultimately the joke was poorly executed and not well done. And so I actually don't kind of mind that. I actually think it's kind of cool that, like, maybe we shouldn't have put an 8-year-old that just a cute little 8-year-old who's actually exists and not just a fake 8-year-old, which a lot of times when they do crazy stuff in on the newspapers and on their shows is like they'll be like a random fake person, that's like a stock person.
And, then it wouldn't have worked because you wouldn't have known whether the girl was the thing they're calling her or not. The whole point is that this is an amazing, cute little girl. But what's interesting is they probably very few people would have been offended if they'd put like one asterisk. Or did they do asterisks?
I don't think there was any asterisks.
Yeah, I don't think there was. And so I think that if there had been like 2 asterisks in place of the letters, even though everyone in the world would know what that word was, all of a sudden it's not offensive because it's asterisks. Like, it's bizarre.
Yeah, but no, I guess back to the bigger picture, though. I mean, and this is just kind of a bigger, I mean, like, the job of a comedian a lot of times is to kind of push that envelope. But should we be held to any, I mean, if a comic is sexist and misogynistic and racist, I mean, we should be calling them out for such things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's a difference between the Onion because the Onion's not a person. Whereas if you're a comedian, you are a person on stage saying things. And people need to understand the difference between satire and not satire, and they need to be able to differentiate. And so, if a comic is regularly misogynist, like I actually think people do have a right to say that Seth MacFarlane was misogynist, and they can be upset about that. The thing that annoys me is that I think Oscars wanted people to be upset by that. But I'm only slightly shifting the topic to, what I always find interesting is that these things we're talking about, which are quote unquote so offensive, are the comedy norm now. To a lot of offense comedy or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
and yet politics is still like the third rail, like for the most part, or at least edgy politics. So I can't be on late night shows insulting the corporations that pay that are their advertisements, but someone could go on there and tell rape jokes. Like it's become this bizarre thing where insulting the corporate world is far more offensive than some horrific joke. Like,
no, absolutely, and it really is. It is pretty crazy that like that is actually misogyny and sexism is the norm for the most part in the stand up world. It's pretty sick, but that's that gets played on all the late night shows. Like you'll get sexist people on Letterman. You get sexist people at any club. Any club you go to is going to be a horrible wreck for the most part. I mean, maybe you'll get lucky and find a handful of comics who are good. But like going to a stand-up club, man, I mean, like there's a lot of horrible, mean, angry, mostly white people, essentially.
Well, yeah, it's certainly not all white people though.
No, it's not.
There's a lot of misogyny coming from all colors, but yeah, no, you're totally right. Like being in, because I play the comedy clubs in New York every night of the week, and I go on after certain acts that it's like I can hardly bear to be in the room, and it's not even like they're bombing, like they're doing fine. People just aren't stopping to think about what this comedian is saying as a whole, and it's like I'm just cringing at like what it says about mankind that this is our entertainment. Or sorry, person kind, as long as we're talking about misogyny.